Hey, it's Alan. I get asked all the time, how exactly does Kadima help people? There are three primary ways. One, we provide one-on-one personalized career coaching with a focus on getting you a great job. Two, we provide an online do-it-yourself course where you can work at your own pace. Three, if you have a job offer, we'll help you negotiate for more. So to find out about these great services and everything else that we offer at Kadima, sign up for our newsletter. Go to SYCKpodcast.com. That's SYCK podcast.com. I promise you, it'll be the best newsletter to accelerate your career. Thanks a lot.
Live from Brooklyn, welcome to the SYCK Podcast, starring Alan Stein, where he steers your career with Kadima. Along with Alan, I'm Russ Reba, and today we talk about SIS. That stands for Sistas in Sales, and this is a community for women of color sales professionals to network, to advance their careers, and most importantly, they find sisterhood. And Alan speaks to one of the most amazing sisters in sales. Her name is Chantel George. But before Alan hangs out with Chantel, he's going to share with us a peek of his personal side. I assume you have a little story of what your week was like outside the office.
I do have some relevant stories to tell you, and especially with the theme of Sistas here. So in prior episodes, I was talking about the summer jobs that Jonah and Lucas grabbed this summer. But my daughter, Jasmine, their sister, get it? She is working as a CIT, a counselor in training at a local summer camp. Training, or actually, I guess, supporting a bunch of 9-year-old girls. So she's working this summer too.
I don't know if I say that sounds like a whole lot of fun or actually a whole lot of work.
She comes home beat and tired every day, and she complains about it, but who cares? She's going. She's actually having a good time there, and it gets her off her phone, which is lovely.
Oh, wow. Imagine that concept. All right, Alan, so set up this episode with Chantel. What can we look forward to?
Yeah, so Chantel's an impressive sales leader who's worked at companies like Twitter and LinkedIn and Dataminer and Yelp and JustWorks. And she saw the glaring gap for support of people of color in sales at these software companies. And she took it upon herself to create this organization that started with just a few people and now has over 6,000 people in 38 countries. It's called Sistas in Sales. And the audience is going to learn a lot about the challenges that women of color have to overcome, how to navigate some of those challenges, and some great actionable tips about how to get involved with ERGs. And you'll learn about what an ERG is, an employee resource group. So this is jam-packed with information, with SYCK advice on how to navigate your career, even if there are lots of people in that organization that don't exactly look like you.
All right, so let's get into it with Chantel George on the SYCK Podcast.
I'm excited to have on the Steer Your Career with Kadima podcast today, the SYCK podcast. I'm welcoming Chantel George. Chantel and I met over LinkedIn, how I meet most of my friends nowadays. I saw one of her posts about a great organization that she has started up called Sistas in Sales. And I was also extremely impressed with Chantel's background at some of the best tech companies in the world. Twitter, she worked at JustWorks, she worked at Yelp. She has such amazing Dataminer. She has such breadth of experience across small and large tech organizations. And now she started this organization, Sistas in Sales. And now I am fortunate to have built a relationship with her and got to know her. So welcome to the SYCK podcast, Chantel.
Thank you for having me. And I agree, LinkedIn really does a great job of connecting like-minded people. So excited to be here.
Yeah. So I try to do my share of introducing you and your background, but you can do a hell of a lot better job. So tell our audience a little bit about you and what brings you here today. What got you to this point today?
Well, that's a good question. You did a great job of listing the companies that I've worked at and the type of corporations that I've had the pleasure to join. But I would say the reason I'm here with you is probably because of the organization that I created 5 years ago. And out of the necessity to create community for Black women in sales and women of color broadly as well, I had quite a quick start when I created this organization. It went from a couple people to now sitting at close to 6,000 in 38 different countries. And this year, we just broke a record in sponsorship sales at $1 million in sales in this first 6 months of the year. So I would say what brought me here is sharing my story, talking about the broader arc, the highs, the lows, what I learned, how companies have been adjusting their priorities to meet our pledges and requests for diversity and inclusion.
The origination, some of the challenges, some of the ideas were occurring for the entirety of your career, if not longer than that. What led to you creating Sistas in Sales? What were some of those key moments or key aspects that led you to take this initiative?
A lot of organizations, especially in the 2010 to 2013, a lot of tech organizations were branching off into the East Coast. And I had the pleasure to work at one of them, and that was Yelp. And within these satellite offices, as they call them, they try to do a good job of giving you as much as you can to figure out a path for yourself. Usually that path is like a 0 to 5 year path. Get a job, do appointment setting, do some small closes. Maybe you become a manager of junior reps, or maybe you get a spot on the enterprise team. And that's all she wrote in a way. And so I had been working in tech as a seller for 4 years, which was around the time that you start wondering what's next for yourself, especially as an early professional. And it seemed like everyone had an idea of what was next for themselves, or had options or had thoughts. And I realized that I didn't have options, thoughts, or strategies because I didn't know how to ask those questions. And there were a lot of cliques forming around me, a lot of unspoken rules happening around me. And as someone who's first generation American, whose family are working class people, there was clearly an information gap there for me. And I wanted to solve that gap. So I started going out to networking events to see if I could find other Black women who were in sales who could maybe help guide me and inform me as to where do we go from here. I've done the entire ladder. I did the junior seller, the account executive, I managed a team, I went into enterprise, I did everything that was available. I started an ERG, I created programs. What's next? So in those conversations, when I went out to these networking events, I just felt I met a lot of women in marketing or in HR or in operations, and I didn't meet anyone in sales. But I didn't know if that meant that there weren't Black women in sales or if I didn't know where they were. So I bet on the fact that I didn't know where they were, and I created an organization for them to be attracted to me so that I could ask them questions. And that was really why I started it. I just wanted to get some clarity on what to do next. And I didn't know so many other women had the same questions.
Yeah. The tech industry, like many industries, is extremely underrepresented by Black talent. I think Salesforce is like 4.8% Black right now. Like Google's around 4%, Facebook around 4%. Meanwhile, the US population is 13.4% Black. 4% Black representation is pathetic. It's not anywhere near it where it needs to be. Did you find in your experience that it's even less common in sales than some other roles? Do you think that there's something unique about sales that makes it even harder for people of color, women, to succeed and be attracted to?
Mm-mm. There's nothing about the selling motion that is prejudice towards Black people, or that Black people are unable to understand the motion, the sales motions. It's the corporate politics that are not intragenerational. So without understanding how to navigate you end up falling out of the industry or not even getting a foot in the industry. But I mean, sales, especially in multicultural communities, are prevalent everywhere. There's Nielsen reports that the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs are Black women. So clearly sales are happening all around us. It's just not happening in corporate America or in big tech.
Yeah. What are and have been some of those obstacles that you've directly seen, and as you're developing and you created Sistas in Sales, what are you looking to help address?
I got my hand slapped a lot when I worked big tech early on. I wanted to have conversations about things that were affecting me, that I knew were affecting other Black people. For example, when there were riots and protests happening in Union Square, Trayvon Martin, for example, I remember sales leadership saying things along the lines of, there's crazy stuff going on outside, but we're going to hit our number inside, and we're just going to keep moving forward. There wasn't really a lot of there were the conversation about what was going on. I know a lot of people refer to 2020 being the year of racial unrest, but actually we know this has been going on for a long time, and a lot of companies have not addressed some of the major things that are distracting their diverse employees from being completely locked in their 9 to 5. So that was an obstacle. It felt very wrong to continue making cold calls while Black men were being shot and murdered at the same time, and there was no acknowledgement internally. The second thing is, and one of the major things that I noticed, and not to go too far into politics, but I remember when Trump got elected and there were groups of people popping champagne in conference rooms, and there wasn't a lot of advocacy for diverse employees who may have felt really shocked by the nature of the government and what was happening. A lot of those things can distract you from emailing and asking people to buy your product. And I just realized that unless we talk about what's going on with us and have create space to acknowledge that we can't be whole and do our jobs while there are major issues going on in our communities. So that was one part of a realization that propelled me to create SYS. And it's something that was a hypothesis of mine that was proven almost immediately. Hypothesis being, if we create a safe space in this industry, will Black women and women of color flock to it? Will they find it valuable? Will it make them see their jobs differently? Will they feel more inspired to do their work? Will they feel more safe? And in our first ever event, I had only 10 women, and they couldn't stop talking to each other. They couldn't stop sharing experiences. They created a group chat. They were this was the missing piece. And so that's why we scaled, and that was the problem we were looking to solve.
You grew from 10 women there to, I think you have north of 6,000 women.
Exactly.
In SYS right now?
Yes.
How do they find out about SYS? It's an amazing organization. And if you want, could you talk a little bit more about what Sistas in Sales is, what you're trying to accomplish?
So I'll answer what it is, what we're trying to accomplish, and how people find out about it. We are a membership organization that is in between corporate America and big tech and our community. And we promote mentorship, job opportunities, and learning and development for this network. We are here because companies have, in 2020, made a ton of pledges to help close this gap. And that gave us a lot of funding to move forward and to continue programming. So programming for us is LinkedIn Live and programs on Hopin, and of course our summit, in addition to hosting mentorship and mentee matching in Slack, being able to pay for workshop leaders to teach us different things. So for example, in March, we had sales recruiter teach you how to fashion your resume for it to be more attractive. We had a publicist teach about personal branding. So every month we are putting together content and information to help our members get stronger and better. And then like the end of the year is that big opportunity to get everybody together in the same room for 3 days. How people find out about us? Well, the first few years, the most miraculous thing, I would say, was from when we had the dinner party of 10 to our first public event, which had over 100 at Salesforce. We made one Eventbrite. I guess taking a step back, I met this woman named Amy Frank who said that she would be willing to let us have an event at Salesforce, our first ever event that was public. So prior to that, I just reached out, text messaged 10 women to come to a dinner with me. Then the next event, I had an Eventbrite and like a formal like flyer that I put online. How we got from 10 people that I knew personally to 100 people that I've never met before in my life, I am not sure. I don't know. I can tell you now that our marketing operations are tighter. I can tell you now, we get a lot of people Google Black women in sales. Companies will evangelize on our behalf to their ERGs. We have a growing mailing list. We launch in different cities around the world. Like we were in Ghana. In a couple of weeks, we'll be in Atlanta in July. Like we do some like on the ground recruiting and getting women involved. But that early amount of momentum, not sure. Word of mouth.
Yeah. You mentioned ERG here. You mentioned ERGs before. And for our listeners that may not know that acronym, it's Employee Resource Groups. Can you talk a little bit about the value of ERGs and how that has or has not benefited you in your career at a lot of these organizations?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I have created maybe 3 or 4 ERGs.
So when you joined, there was none. So you created it because it was not there.
Yeah, I partnered with other people that thought it was a good idea and created it. And that was it. So ERGs are like one of the best and the most respected ERGs, I would say, are Blacks at Microsoft. They have been around for 30 years. A lot of the other ERGs are new, like started 2014, 2015, in response to some of the early waves of catastrophic racial unrest. So the ERGs were meant to be a place to have cathartic release, talk about the things that you're dealing with, the microaggression. There was a time, especially in tech sales, where managers were just sales reps that had worked at the respective company for 2 years or so. Because big tech was growing so fast, they needed more managers, and they were just hiring individual contributors that had a few good quarters back to back. And they didn't have leadership skills, or they didn't do unconscious bias training, or they've never been around Black people before. Maybe they're from a small town in the Midwest and got a job, and first job out of college, not actually knowing different cultural differences and norms. So we needed ERGs to kind of vent and just talk about our experiences and connect with one another and be there for one another and go back into the trenches the next day. So there's a definite value for an ERG program. What it doesn't do, I would say, is, well, it depends. Let me not be that overarching. It depends on where this ERG lands within the organization. Often I find that it's difficult to connect ERG funding to the business and receive ERG funding. I think companies sometimes stop at just creating spaces for us to talk about how we feel and not invest actual funding into the ERG so that the people in the ERG can achieve the things that they want to achieve. That includes conference funding, that includes personal development opportunities, and a whole slew of different things that show the ERG members that the company actually cares about their well-being and not that they just gave them a conference room at 5:00 to talk.
Yeah. Are there any organizations that you've either worked at or that you're aware of that are particularly good with supporting Black women of color, especially within the organization, within sales? So ERGs could be performative in nature at some companies, could be really effective at some other organizations. You mentioned Microsoft. I think they have a 30-year-old organization. But which companies are doing a good job, either that you've been at or you've heard of?
Well, I worked at LinkedIn for about 2.5 years, and I was the global program manager for Black Inclusion Group at LinkedIn. And so that means that I sat across the 10 different offices and I tracked their local programming in addition to creating global programming that all offices would partake in. The organization of ERGs at LinkedIn is, well, the actual team, the amount of leaders involved, the amount of open door policy that they create to ensure that ERG leaders can voice their opinions all the way to the C-suite. The amount of thoughtfulness that goes into like the ERG committees themselves. We met very frequently as a committee to design programs. I'm especially proud of creating a Black-owned business pop-up in during the holiday times where we partnered with the NAACP, and we created a catalog for people to buy from Black-owned businesses that were hand-selected by the NAACP, and also in partnership with Beyonce's nonprofit Bake. We were able to bring in politicians to speak about voter registration and to understand the Electoral College. Like, there's funding provided to ERGs to create what we need to make change. And in addition to that, they are paying ERG members now, because it almost is like another full-time job, so that they can continue being inspired to do the work and to continue feeling valued. So that's hands down one of the best ERG experiences I've ever had.
That's actually a great point and pretty innovative. I haven't heard of that, to get compensated in some way for your involvement in the ERG, because these are not mandatory. These are voluntary organizations. And it sounds like in a couple of situations, you might have even created it yourself. So this takes significant time and energy that is probably not reflected in your performance review at the end of the year. It may or may not be reflected in your performance review. And the more time you're involved with ERG, a closed-minded manager may think that that's less time that you're out selling whatever product you're trying to be selling.
Exactly.
Yeah. So LinkedIn's done a good job of funding and also encouraging this. Are there other practices that you've seen at companies, either that you've been at or that you have your 6,000 members at, that are doing good things that could be replicated elsewhere? And then we'll talk about some of the bad. But what do you see as particularly, and you don't need to name the bad, but for the good, are you seeing things happen effectively at these companies? Because all the companies are talking a big game. They've been talking a big game. I was at Google in 2012 with Trayvon Martin's murder, and I saw lots of conversations occur, not lots of action. That's from my perspective as a white dude. It seems like there were a couple of senior Black leaders that were brought out to talk at every event, because there were only a couple of senior Black leaders in the sales org that kept speaking there. But are there some companies that are doing a particularly good job outside of LinkedIn that you hear from your 6,000 sisters in sales?
Yeah, I would say that I noticed that women who are leading, so we see that white women who are in leadership positions are becoming very close allies to junior and mid-level Black women and women of color. Almost feels like a repeat in history when you think about that. But ultimately, I noticed that the allies may not know everything, but they are certainly trying to clear blockers and using their privilege and using their voices to make things happen. I experienced that. I experienced a white woman advocate for me in times where I wanted to make something happen. And I feel like it's not necessarily in response to ERG, but more so resources. Just overall, the ability to help find resources for someone who wants to go somewhere, do something, or who needs money to improve their employee experience. So I would say allies have been showing up more now than ever I've seen before. And it's incredible. And I think that type of support is necessary. The second wave of that, which I think perhaps are where ERGs could help, is instead of just looking at all of these diverse people in like a department of ERG, like the ERG, grouping, how do we find the next wave of leaders from this space? I don't know if that's an internal hiring goal, which is how do we promote the ERG leaders how do we promote ERG members into leadership? How do we look at an ERG leader's background and connect it to their ability to be a great leader across the business? Those are the things that are not being connected right now.
And when you're talking about some white women stepping up as advocates, as allies, are there even a lot of opportunity for Black women to do so? Because often at the mentorship level, or the allyship level, it may be coming at a senior level. And the pyramid probably gets less and less dense of people of color talent as you go up within the organization hierarchy. So have you been able to find strong female people of color mentors that are above you in your path, or are they few and far between?
Well, that's why SYS exists. Of course, they are very few and far between. They're not as far between as you think. They may be not a lot of them, but they are certainly accessible. I had the pleasure of having Bonita Stewart, which we talked about, I think one of our other connections, keynote for us in 2020, and then was so eager to keynote for us in 2021, which we're so thankful, and we're thankful for. So these women are accessible to our network. Their information is accessible. They are looking for a platform to share their opinions. There just wasn't one organized way to do it in the past. And so I'm hoping that this innovation of just creating space for Black and brown women to see these sales, celebrity women, will encourage more saleswomen to stay in the game, because it's not that there is not a lot of them. It's just that we haven't been organized in this fashion before. And we need collective information so that we can negotiate and advocate for ourselves better. Because a lot of us are getting stuck in the mid-level space. And the reason why we're not getting into the senior space, where you may feel that there's more of us, like using your pyramid example, is because of the unspoken corporate politics. Who do you talk to? What do you say when you talk to them? I'll never forget one of my very good friends. We worked together. We split the country. We were both account executives. We split the country in half. That's how sales leadership had us do it. And I was calling on the East Coast and he was calling on the West Coast. And our manager at the time ended up stepping down. And so it was up to the company to decide how to move forward. As someone who is, again, still new to corporate politics, I'm like, oh, we'll wait and see. We'll see what happens next. My colleague created a PowerPoint to pitch himself as to why he should be the new sales manager. I would have never thought of that. So it truly just boils down to understanding how to play the game.
Yeah, I've seen that occur as well. I saw two senior leaders. One, it wasn't black and white, but it was a man and a woman. And the man pitched himself for this role. This is almost the exact same scenario, open head, and they had to figure out who. It was a bake-off, but the woman didn't even realize that it was a bake-off that she could enter. And meanwhile, this guy was busy presenting his baked goods and got the role. The woman had a performative interview, but it was too late at the time. It was just for window dressing, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you don't know how to play the game, you can't play the game. You need to know the rules. You need to know the spoken rules and the unspoken rules.
Yeah, and this game that you talk to totally exists. There is no rule book that is written. It's unwritten rules. How does SYS, or how do you try to reveal these unwritten rules to people? And what do you think? Like, I have some ideas, but I would love your perspective. because these unwritten rules are very important. It led to this other person getting promoted instead of you, not even being considered for it. And that happens on a daily basis. And over the course of the career, decisions like that put one group ahead and one group behind. Or not one group, like one person in that situation ahead and one situation behind. So how do you, with either CIS or in your experience, how do you suggest people, in a perfect world, there would be no unwritten rules. Everything would be clear. We'd be following rules of the game that are fair and equitable, and everyone has an equal chance. I haven't yet to see that place exist. So how do you, with CIS, try to encourage or advocate or provide support for people so that they can see some of these bullshit games that are played at every organization I've been at? I've worked for 21 companies. You've worked for a bunch of companies. I don't know if you've been in one company where these games don't exist.
No, the games exist everywhere. But I ask, we have panels and events that talk about this very thing. And the women aren't afraid to go there. Now, any hesitation that we have gotten to go there, which is understandable, comes from trying to straddle the line between being a helpful resource and also maintaining personal brand at the same time. We have the luxury of running our own companies where we can say what we think makes sense and there will be no repercussions, or if there are, we can always go toe to toe with whomever. If you are the VP of a large company, you don't have that much liberty. So, I appreciate all the information that we get. It's really better than what we were getting before, which was nothing. And we continue to discuss ways to use the information that we're getting to be better, and it is working. There was an article that came out, and I'll get you the source for it, that said that working in communities is one of the best ways to get a job. Meeting people, playing the game that we can figure out, which is meeting people, asking questions, putting yourself out there. I've seen it happen. 2 members in our organization got jobs at LinkedIn over the past week through meeting a hiring manager through the Slack, having conversations, not waiting for a job description. Those are the game. That's the game. The game is getting in front of, even before the JD is posted. What do you need? How can I be of an asset to your team? Not being as reactionary. So we are promoting being more proactive. We are promoting take as much information as these women are willing to share with you. And some of it is just going to be a part of life for us to now take that and do what we can with it. But change is happening.
Yeah. Do you think it's a fear? So I'm a big fan of building relationships and building networks. 24 out of my 29 jobs I got because I was considered for because of who I knew. I still had to interview for most of them, but it was because of who I knew. I'm guessing a handful of your jobs also you were introduced to from somebody that knew you and could vouch for you? Or did you get them all, or did you get all your roles cold, just applying?
I applied for one job ever. Every other job has come through my personal brand, which is another thing. And I don't know if we'll go into that in this call. You can make yourself magnetic to recruiters and hiring managers. You could still do more than that, which is what we're talking about, other than just having a strong personal brand, knowing who the players are, constantly having conversations and maneuvering within an organization. But that was how I got most of my jobs.
How do you advise people to become more magnetic, to improve the likelihood of success, to increase that surface area of luck that some people refer to it as, or increase that serendipity? How do you encourage people to do that?
A lot of people are afraid to post on LinkedIn or post on any other social platform their opinions because they think that it's going to come back to bite them, or that the company will give them repercussions. Well, I think that you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't talk about your feelings and the state of the world and your value and what you've done great that week. You should not just leave it in a company document, because companies go through changes. And if something were to happen and you no longer work there, who knew what you did? Who else knows what you did? other than your immediate manager and maybe a few people on your team.
Is there a person or two who has influenced your perspective and taught you to kind of understand that, hey, the game's played this way, so I got to learn how to play the game? Like, how did you learn to kind of be one of the 3 to 4%, it's probably lower, of Black women in sales? But how have you been successful here? Was it mentorship? How did you break some of these unplayed rules?
Well, I take a little bit of everything. I'm watching, I listen to the women who speak on panels. I'm also their audience. I'm watching them, I'm learning about what they're doing, and I take a piece from here, I take a piece from there, and I apply it to my daily. I don't think there is anyone who can just deliver, here's everything you need to know. You have to constantly be in a seat of curiosity to figure out different ways people have done it. The truth is, we are at a deficit of information around corporate America and big tech. So it's going to take some time for us to piece together all the little tidbits that people are saying and turn it into a strategy.
What are some of those tidbits, like advocating for yourself?
Yeah, everything is negotiable. I learned that maybe 2 years ago. I learned stocks, vesting periods, getting a 6-month guarantee versus like a 3-month guarantee, which some sellers will get when they go into an organization as possible. I remember listening to a sales leader talk about how she negotiated her company to pay for her parking because she was living outside of the tri-state or living a little far away from the office. Relocation, like everything is negotiable. I did not know that. That's one thing that was really kind of jaw-dropping. The second thing I would say is people like to work with people they like. Sometimes it's not even about their competence. And especially in our community where we're told to work twice as hard to get where we need to go, a lot of our focus is on being the most competent, being the best at checking the boxes, and not being loose enough to let our personality come out and allow ourselves to break down some of those barriers that make us likable and let us be more casual. That is very anti-Black culture. When you are in predominantly white spaces, you have to code switch. You don't want to be in a position where someone might think that you don't have what you have, or you don't deserve to be there. So but at the same time, as the higher up you go, the more senior leaders are looking for your compatibility with them, which matters so much. So finding out how to let your personality out while also doing your job, while also code switching, but not too much. It's a lot of work, but you learn it as you go.
How has COVID, working remotely, working from home, made it easier or harder? I've spoken to a lot of people. Some people are like the situation a lot more, not looking forward to going back into the office. Some people are eager to go back. But what's been better about the remote work situation? What's been made it harder as someone like underrepresented, a Black woman, or anybody just trying to get this advocacy, support, guidance, and be successful?
Well, you can preserve some of your mental energy. That's what's better. And like we talked about, having to juggle all of those different ways to show up every minute of the day. You can, when you're not on camera, you don't have to be having a smile plastered on your face for fear that someone thinks that you're being an angry Black woman or that you have a problem with someone or something. So that is really liberating. But then like I said, the downside is people don't get to experience your full personality. They only get to experience one part of it. And that's dangerous, a dangerous labeling for Black people everywhere, because we are definitely more dynamic. We need space and vulnerability to pull that parts of ourselves out.
We're running a little low on time, but I do want to talk more about Sistas and sales and what you're building there and what you offer these 6,000 and growing women. I believe you have a conference coming up and some other great resources. Talk a little bit about your organization and how you help enable Black women in sales to accelerate their careers.
Yeah, well, the conference is one of the biggest things we work on all year. And it's a big one because we're celebrating 5. This is our 5th year. And we're doing some full circle moments. So we'll have one of our first ever moderator come in and host one of the days, and a lot of surprises, a lot of guest speakers and guest media personalities as well. 3 days full of information to help you understand the unspoken rules. So for example, all about how to increase your bonuses and your salary, all about how to understand more about your sales skills and up-leveling them with different types of resources. Some companies don't even offer proper sales training, so we want to circumvent that. And then the third thing would be how to hold yourself and your company accountable. Speak a lot about holding ourselves accountable, which is important, yes. But how do we hold your company accountable? They're not perfect. They're just human beings. And sometimes it can be intimidating to raise your hand and say, hey, that didn't sit right with me. But we have to get out of that mindset. So those are the three different talk tracks we'll have. And right now we have about 10 sponsors, and we're really thankful to have Google and Walmart Connect as our largest champion sponsors. So New York City, September 21st to September 23rd, in Queens, New York, every day from 9 to 5.
And where can people go to find out, to register for, to find out more information about this?
The website, which is sistasinSales.com.
Okay. SISTASINSALES.com.
Correct.
Awesome. And I was going to go to my last question, but you piqued my interest with holding yourself and others accountable. So how do you recommend that Black women in sales hold their companies accountable? It's hard, because I've seen a lack of accountability at the companies that I've worked at. And I've done a very poor job myself attempting to hold people accountable, and it did not prove positive results for me. And I'm a white dude. I'm curious how you, any SYCK advice that you have on that front that I could have done better, that Black women could do better, about how to hold companies accountable, where I find they're talking a big game and they're not necessarily walking the talk.
Find your tribe first. Don't go into the fire alone. That's not the way to get things done. Find other like-minded people and strategize with them, because a company will think it's just one person complaining or one person having an issue. No, it's more than that. It's most likely a group. Spend the time to strategize and find internal allies. Bounce ideas off one another and come up with a sound strategy, and together present a problem. Present a problem?
Or what about the solution?
Well, first there is a problem, right? And the issue is that,
provide visibility to the problem that exists.
To the problem, exactly.
Got it. Okay, cool. Well, I should have heeded your advice. I could have had some different outcomes. But anyway, it was good learning for me. But I think that's great advice for people. Don't fight it on your own. Find others alongside. Something that people have taught me as well is find advocates with more power than yourself as well, that can and also understand those unwritten rules and those politics that exist within the organization, and who are the power players and who have a little less power.
Exactly. That's right.
Yeah. So Chantel, my very last question for you. You've shared some really great advice here. Any last SYCK advice you would offer our listeners here on Acceleration Nation of what they should be doing in their career to take proactive charge and to accelerate their career?
The best piece of advice I can give you or give the listeners is be transparent with one another. When you find an advocate, or when you find a friend that's trying to get towards the same goal that you are trying to get to, share salaries, share obstacles, share wins. We are stronger together. We cannot do this alone. It was always a shocker when I found out that I was the lowest paid on the team. I didn't know that. I couldn't negotiate for what I wanted. You have to talk. We are not doing this in silos.
Are there good forums that people can go to, to find this? I know some that I go to, but I'm curious, which ones do you recommend for people to go to find some of this transparency, which may not exist in normal work life?
There is a boom of sales communities that have popped up recently. Rev Genius, Sales for the Culture, of course, Sistas in Sales, Women Sales Pros, Girls Club, you name it. There are many, many, many organizations, Women in Sales Club, I could keep going on. Yeah. Join them, ask questions, and it's okay. We have to break out of that fear mindset that no one can know what we're dealing with.
Yeah, no, sunshine is the greatest disinfectant, right? Share the transparency. Well, Chantel, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate your willingness to connect with me on LinkedIn, to spend some time with me, to teach me more about Sistas in sales, to share a little bit more about your path and the path of others that I have not seen. And for the work that you're doing to help 6,000 women and growing to accelerate their careers in sales. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Awesome conversation with Chantel. We truly appreciate her spending time with us for the show today. And that wraps up another amazing episode of the SYCK podcast with Alan Stein. Be sure to check out past episodes and other resources on the website at syckkpodcast.com. That's SYCK. Alan, what's the first link that you want your listeners clicking on when they get to syckkpodcast.com?
Sign up for the Kadima Careers Accelerator newsletter. Like Chantel talked about in this episode, there are unwritten rules that disproportionately impact underrepresented, underestimated, underpaid groups. And we disclose all that information in our newsletter and give you lots of opportunity, insight, resumes, the inside baseball game of how working in tech works.
Well, there you go, syckkpodcast.com. That's SYCK. For your host, Alan Stein, I'm Russ Reba, and we hope you've enjoyed the episode with Chantel. You are going to love the next one.